So a couple of things that I did want to quickly talk about, and thanks to Judy for reminding me. Some of you do probably come across Captivate save glitches. I'm just going to share with you very quickly how I sort of work and what my workflow is. Now, yes, Captivate is a very, very hungry bit of software. It uses a lot of RAM and a lot of computer memory. So you do need to be mindful about what you actually have open at any one time. So on that note, when you are working with Captivate, it's really a good idea to have pretty much everything else closed down. Also, if you do have it open for a little while, if you've been working on it for a little while in the course of the morning or over the course of the day, it's a good idea just to save everything, close it down, give it a couple of seconds to rest. I'm being serious. Give it a couple of seconds to rest, and then reopen it, and then you might find that some of the little funny glitches may be fixed. So on that note, whenever I'm working, say for example this file which I called empty file, what I normally do is I will open it up and I will actually put today's date. So for example, today's date, and I will always do it this way, 2018-08, so year, month and date, and that is the recommended date naming convention from Stanford University. So I'm not going to argue with them. That you can do your own research, but that's how I do it. And I will save that. And then if I'm working on this file quite a bit, every hour or so, I will just do a save as. Now you can do a shortcut key for this, Control-Shift-S for save as. And then I might just go in and put B at the end, and then that's my version B. And then I'll do a little bit more work. Another hour goes past, Control-Shift-S, and then I'll just put a C. Now, you may be thinking that's a little bit overkill. However, some of you may have experienced Captivate crashing and losing all that work. So a good habit to get into is to do that naming. And obviously, over time, you can get rid of those archived files. That's entirely up to you. Okay, so getting back to the whole purpose of the course today is around working with images. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit. First of all, I just wanted to talk about images in relation to file sizes. Okay, so first of all, I've done a little bit of an experiment here whereby we've got some files, and I'll actually open these up. I'll start off with opening up so first of all, if you look here, pretty much an empty Captivate file. So the source file of an empty Captivate file that has nothing in it except text, you'll see there that the file size is 531 kilobytes. So that's sort of your starting point as far as file sizes are concerned. Now, on that note, if you actually publish an empty file, so probably the two most important file sizes are your source file, because you are working on the source file. The bigger the source file, the more RAM it's going to take up. So when you're working on a large Captivate file, the bigger that file is, obviously it's going to put more pressure on your computer as you're working on it. But then the other file size that we need to consider is the published file size that's going to get uploaded to the learning management system. So what I've done here is you'll see in front of us, we've got the empty source file for a Captivate file that has nothing in it, starts off as 531 kilobytes. For that empty file to be published as a zip file, that starting point is 1.2 megabytes. So it's still small enough to fit onto a floppy disk. So that's a good indication. So if you need to transfer that file, you can put it onto a floppy disk, and that empty zip file will actually fit onto a floppy disk. Okay, so this is where it starts getting a little bit more interesting. Let's have a look and see what happens when we start working with images in files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you some examples of some files that have been created. And these files are essentially brand new files. And I'm just working with blank projects at the moment, so just to keep things sort of easy to deal with. And what I'm really interested in talking about, first of all, is this canvas size for a blank project. So obviously 640 by 480 canvas size is a very small canvas size. And when you create a blank project that has a canvas size of 640 by 480, and I'll just open something that I created earlier. Here's one. Now, this particular Captivate file, which is actually has a canvas size of 640 by 480, has an image in it, and this image is a full-size image. So by that I mean the size of that image that we see in front of us is actually this image here, and I'll show you which image it is. It's actually this image right here. And that image is actually over 11 megabytes in size. So that, converting that, that's about, let's just say 9 or 10 floppy disks. So that image is actually really big. Now, I know that when we are working with our Captivate files, we can get images from all over the place. So people email us images, we download them from the intranet, we get them from our stock libraries, all of that sort of stuff. And a lot of the time they can be uncompressed. So the important thing that I want to talk about here is what impact do uncompressed images ultimately have on file sizes. So this image, which is about 11 megabytes on a canvas size of 640 by 480, ultimately gives us these file sizes. So this file, which I've currently got open, is at about 12,000 kilobytes now. That's just that one image. And published, that 640 by 480, or this file here, published as a zip file going onto the LMS is about just over 1.5 megabytes. So you'll see that Captivate does a pretty good job in compressing images. So ultimately, you can be pretty rest assured that if you bring really large images into the file and then publish them, Captivate will do a pretty good job at compressing. But that's not the only hurdle. That's not the main hurdle we're dealing with here at the moment. It's the hurdle of how big is the file size that we're working on that can potentially cause issues when saving and crashing our computer. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close down this file, 640 by 480. The next file that I wanted to open up is a 1280 by 720. So this file is a lot bigger in canvas size, which means that that image, when it's compressed for zipping, isn't as small. So it's not being compressed at a small dimension size, it's getting compressed at a large dimension size. And going back to those file sizes here, you'll see that it is exactly the same file. It's using exactly the same photograph. The only difference is the canvas size is bigger. And you'll see here that the actual source file is about the same size as the 640 by 480, but when you publish it at that canvas size, you'll see that it's a lot bigger. So canvas size can impact, especially if you're working with images and uncompressed images, the canvas size can have an impact on the zipped file size, which ultimately gets uploaded to your learning management system and will ultimately influence the experience that your end users are having. So if you have end users who are on 3G dongles, for example, and they're working remotely or whatever the case may be, and they're having issues with working. There we go. Someone's just posted in the Adobe Learning community. That the canvas size can have a big influence on that. Okay, now just while we're talking about canvas size, what I did actually want to discuss here as well is the when you do publish the different canvas sizes, I do sometimes get a lot of questions around images being pixelated. Okay, now if those of you who have followed our previous webinars, and Gary, I'll get back to your question in a minute. For those of you who followed our previous webinars, you may have come across a previous webinar we did about scaling. So publishing your HTML5 files as a scalable HTML5 file. So a experiment that I did that I've done is these two files. If you so that's the 1280 by 720, and that's the 640 by 480, and it's exactly the same image. The 640 by 480 has been obviously shrinked to fit the canvas, but it's still the same image being used from the library. And the 1280 by 720 is not as small, but it's still the same image. Now, here's what happens. Because when you go to publish these files, some of you may have seen this before, you've got this option called scalable HTML content. Now, in a nutshell, what that means is that, and here's my published files. What that means is that as you change the size of the browser window, the file will scale according to the size. Now, don't get this mixed up with responsive. This is not responsive. I repeat, this is not responsive. This is called scalable. It's scaling, and the dimensions are in the same ratio the whole time. So the dimensions are being constrained as you resize that image, or resize that browser window. Now here's the thing, if you look closely, here's the 1280 by 720 file that has been published and scaled, and you may be able to see that depending on the quality of your webinar connection, but that quality of that image is actually quite good, it's quite sharp. The 640 by 480, so if I go to the 640 by 480 file, which while you're working with it looks quite good, you can probably guess what's going to happen here. I go to publish, tick scalable HTML content, and if I go to that file, 640 by 480, you might notice that that image is not as sharp as the 1280 by 720. Why is that? Because, that's a really good question, I'm glad you asked. Why is that? Is because the file is being published at a pixel dimension of 640 by 480. When it gets scaled up into larger browser windows, then obviously that pixelation starts to occur. So the moral of this story is, we're on a bit of a double-edged sword here. Going back to quickly my, here we go, scaling. Don't forget that when you scale up, when you've got a large canvas size and you zip for the LMS, the file size is going to be considerably larger than the smaller canvas size. So you might opt for the smaller canvas size, but the problem with the smallest canvas size is that when you scale up, your images get pixelated. So here's my message to you. When you're developing this content, number one, you've got to think about your audience, of course. If a majority of your audience is going to be looking at your content, say for example via an iPad, you may be able to get away with creating a smaller canvas size. If they are on an iPad, chances are they might be on the road, they might have intermittent reception. So that small canvas size might be a lot better for delivery. And also think about your content. If you don't have a lot of images that really require sharpness in the image, by all means think about a smaller canvas size because ultimately that published file will be smaller and be easier to digest over networks and all of that sort of stuff. So, good question, Gary. Let's go back and have a look at something. So, I'm going to actually, let's publish these out again and just do a little experiment. So I'm going to publish these. So I'm going to take the zip off and I'm going to publish scalable HTML content for 640 by 480. I'm not going to view, and I'm going to publish this one again into scaling. I'm going to take zip off, scalable. So it's exactly the same file, just different canvas sizes. And what we're looking at here is, without being zipped, let's have a look at the file size for this, and it hasn't been zipped. And you'll see that that complete file size is, say, 3.4 for 640 by 480, and 1280 is 4.71. So in answer to your question, Gary, the compression gets done at both the Captivate level and the zip level as well. So obviously zipping files does do some compression, as we can see here, because unzipped, exactly the same content comes in at 4.71, unzipped, but when it's zipped, it's 2.7. But that's still considerably smaller than the actual source file as well. So in answer to your question, does Captivate do the compression, or is it zip that does the compression? It's both. It does the compression there. Okay, so hopefully that's getting people to appreciate that. I guess rule number one is to try and compress your images. Now, one of the best ways, one of the quickest, easiest ways that I compress images is by using PowerPoint. So just to quickly, I'll show you this for those of you who don't have Photoshop and all of that sort of stuff. Now, see here we've got full-size images, and these full-size images that are being used in the full-size image folder come in at 11 megabytes and 8 megabytes. Now, those exact same images compressed through PowerPoint come in at 2 megabytes. So, hands up if you know how to do a compression through PowerPoint. I'll quickly show you. This is pretty straightforward. So what you can do is you can insert your images, so pictures, and I'm going to find my pictures. What is the thing about? There we go. Here, webinar images. Okay, so full-size images. Here they are. I'll just do one as an example. Our friendly goat comes in at 11 megabytes. Okay, so what you can do is you can even crop at this stage. So you can, say, do a little bit of cropping if you want. And while you've got the image selected after you've cropped, in the format ribbon, you've got this compress pictures option. So click on compress pictures. If you've got more than one image in there, and what I sometimes tend to do is I'll just go like this, insert pictures. I'll select all of the pictures all in one hit, just using the shift key or lasso key, insert. And then what you can do is you can select one image, go to the format ribbon, click on compress pictures, and take the tick off, apply only to this picture, take the tick off. You also want to delete the cropped areas of the picture as well. And I would also suggest using the target output of email 96 or even screen 150. So depending on how sharp and crisp you want these images to be used. If you know how to use Photoshop, and absolutely use Photoshop, you wouldn't even have to use PowerPoint, but I just want to, not everyone's got Photoshop, most people have got PowerPoint. So click on OK, that's compressing. And then what you do is you right mouse click on each image, save as picture, and then we go back to wherever our folder here is, compressed images. The test that I'm doing right here in front of your very eyes. So I'm going to test that, save that, and go back to here. You'll see that this image is 206 kilobytes. Wow. And it's still the same size. So you can achieve some really good compression just by using PowerPoint. So that's might take a little bit of extra time just to incorporate that through your workflow, but it is thoroughly recommended to help improve the overall efficiency of your files. And just to show you something that we created earlier, here's the compressed images, and you'll see that the compressed images zip, which is exactly the same, 2.5 megabytes, which is a lot different to this one, which comes in at sort of 5, but it ultimately comes down to the source file size. Okay, so is everyone happy with that? So put a little bit of thought into that end result. Be mindful of using high-res images because you can achieve the same end result and user experience with compressed images, and it could help to address some of those RAM problems and Captivate crashing as well. Okay, so going back to, I'll just save these, and let's have a look at some things around using Captivate and images. So it's actually working with images inside the actual file itself. Okay, so here I have a Captivate file. I'm going to insert a new slide, Control-Shift-J, that's right, thanks for that. And of course, once you've got your images in there, you can drag the image across. Now I'm using the full-size images here, that's okay. And of course, we can make images smaller. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is how to turn an image into a button. Okay, so, and by the way, we can do cropping and editing of the image inside of Captivate. Now, just mindful of that. Say I want to create a button that was more of the head of the goat. So what I can do here is, while I've got the image selected, I can go over to the right-hand side. I can click on Edit Image. I can choose Crop, and then I can just change that like so. The thing to be mindful of when you are working with images and starting to crop images inside of Captivate is that, of course, what Captivate will do is it will start to create extra files in your library. So you'll see here now that I've just literally cropped that image, and all of a sudden I've got this new image at .jpg2, and you'll see what it's actually done is it's more than doubled the file size. So go figure. So you need to keep an eye on your library. You need to keep an eye on this. What I would do in this situation is I would have probably cropped it somewhere else. But if I did crop it in Captivate, you can also take that crop image, and you could actually export it out and then crop it elsewhere, compress it elsewhere and bring it back in. So you might be thinking, God, there's a lot of housekeeping here, but look, we're only talking about one image on one slide. Imagine if you've got lots and lots of images. I've been working on Captivate files recently that are like 150, 200 megabytes in size. Can you imagine opening up those files, how long it takes? Can you imagine previewing those files, how long that takes? So all of this adds time to your development time. So if you can put some checks and balances in place at the beginning, work with small file sizes, and then things will be a lot easier. So that's just my what grinds my gears. Okay, so what I've seen happen before is this. So you'll have an image, click on the goat, and what people will do is they might put a click box on it, like so. And all of a sudden now we've got two objects and two layers on the timeline that are actually involved in an image with a button. So just quickly going to show you how you can actually create a button from an image, but we incorporate it into a single shape, which becomes a single object that we just need to manage. So we don't have multiple objects that we need to manage. So what I tend to do in this situation is I will draw a shape like so, just any size shape. And the first thing I'll do is say I wanted to turn this goat, I'm actually going to delete that one. I want to turn this goat image into a button. So the first thing I will do is I'll select the goat because I want to make the shape the same size as that image so things aren't skewed. So I'll select the image and at the same time I'll select the shape. And then using my favorite align toolbar, which should be open automatically on everyone's computer, this button saying resize the same size. So it takes the first selected object and resizes all of the subsequent selected objects as the same size. And you'll now notice that that shape is the same size as the image. That's step number one. Second step is to, figure out what image am I looking for in the library. Well, this is a really good question. So what you can do here, and chances are you're going to have lots and lots and lots of images in the library. So when I go to reference that image, and I'll just show you something that can happen here. I'm going to fast forward a few steps, and then I'm going to go back, fix something to make the next few steps a lot easier to manage. While you've got that shape selected, we go to the solid button in your properties panel. See, you've got image fill. Then you go to fill, and then you click on this yellow folder. Now, over time, you are going to end up with a lot of images in here. And chances are a lot of those file names or library item names will be called clipboard. And you'll notice that you can't actually make this window bigger, so you can't see past that name there. So put some order into your naming convention, even in the library, and it will make it a lot easier to look for the image that you're after. And unfortunately, and I have protested outside the Adobe head office about this, when this list comes up, it doesn't actually display it in any sort of order. I think it's in the order, it's the create order when that file was actually created inside the library. So here's what you can do. We can right mouse click on the actual image that we want to use on the stage. We've got this option called Find in Library, which is really a cool option. We go to the library item. I'm going to right mouse click on that. I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call this Goat Cropped, like so. You'll notice that that doesn't do anything. It's still attached to that image. I can now go back to my shape, go to Fill. I can click on the folder again, and you'll see here that it's easy to find the file that I'm looking for and click on OK. There's a couple of other things I can do here. I can sort of do some image manipulation, which we'll talk about shortly. And I can also crop here as well, and if I want to flip that, I can. So I might just flip it just to have a bit of fun. And then I'll click on OK. Now, by default, when you bring in an image into the library, it sort of brings it in as the original scale. So what you can do here, under the Fill button, you've got a couple of options here. We're going to take the tick off tile, because that's a default setting. And we're going to leave it at stretched. Now, the reason we're going to leave it at stretched is this. When you go to resize this image, and don't forget it's the same constraint as the original image that we copied, we hold the Shift key down, and when we go to resize it, you'll see that it actually stretches in proportion to that size. So what we've done here is we've created a shape that has a fill of an image. So we've been able to incorporate a shape and an image into the one object, which in fact is one object on the slide and one layer in the timeline, so it's a lot easier to manage. How can we now turn this into a button? Well, same thing that we can do before. We tick on Use As Button, like so. And a couple of other things, of course, we want hand cursor and disable click sound. Here's the thing that we need to be mindful of, is that when you click Use As Button, Captivate will automatically give you these rollover and down states. So we've got rollover, which by default will give you this gray option. So we can go back in, choose image fill, it'll pick up the image. And what we can actually do is we can do, and by the way, don't forget I'm in rollover state, so we can do some editing on that image inside the rollover state. So you can go back into the drop-down menu, custom image, click on the pencil, and now what we can do is we can, say, flip that back if we want. We can add some, like a bit of hue. We can do some crazy stuff here. Not too crazy. And then click on OK. So that's the rollover state. And what we can also do as well, which actually works quite well, is we can include some information about this image. And I know the whole rage these days is click more for more information, so that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have a little bit of fun with states and images. So this is how we can incorporate everything into one layer without using advanced actions and so forth. So one last thing, we go to down state. I normally just get rid of the down state, so I'm going to delete that down state. So I've just got normal and rollover. Let's have a quick look and see how this works. I think I've still got everyone there. And you're taking something away. Hi, and Andreas, is it? Andreas, hi, nice to see you there. So what we've got now, it's generating for the first time, so it's going to take a little while. Look how long it's taking to generate. That's just with a couple of high resolution images. And you'll notice now that as I hover over, there's an effect that I'm getting. Being able to edit the image in that rollover state. Last but not least, I'm going to go into state view, and what I can do here is I'm actually going to create a new state. It's going to be custom, and I'm just going to call this information, like so. And under that information space, I do have the flexibility of being able to edit that state as well. So I might actually turn it upside down just to show you what's happening here. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add a shape to this state. And I'm just going to type in, this is a goat, like so. And while I've got these two objects selected, and don't forget I'm in the information state only, so this isn't impacting any other states. So I can select the image first. I can then select the shape with the information in it. I can align them using the align tools. I can make them the same width. And then I'm just going to zoom in, Control 3. I'm just going to move that up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the width on that so I can see. There we go. So that shape is just slightly, try that size again. Because that's got a width on it as well. So I'm going to actually take that width off. And then now they're the same size. So you can see the width of those objects are the same size. Exit state. Last but not least, here we go. I'm going to add an action to this, and that action is go to next state of that smart shape, and I should have named it, of course. I'm not going to continue playing project because that'll just send me on to the next slide. But let's have a look and see how this works. This is a bit of fun. And by the way, everything is happening within the one state. No advanced actions, no show, hide, none of that. It's all happening. So there's my rollover. Click. There we go. click, 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 because the rollovers. So what I would probably do here, that's a bit of an issue. I'm going to take the rollover off in this particular example. And I'm going to do a preview, because every time you roll over it, depending on what state it's in, it'll show you the rollover state. So come back another time to see how we can fix that. But this is a pretty quick way of achieving a click for next state, click without advanced actions. Okay, so that's turning shapes into buttons. How are we all going in there? Anyone got any specific questions at the moment around that? I guess also, and time flies when you're having fun, a couple of other things that I wanted to draw to your attention is, say for example, we had this goat and it was on lots of different slides. So it was like our goat icon. So I'm just going to paste that like so. You can also apply, so you can actually, let's just double check here, probably put this on the master slide. But the thing that I wanted to point out here is if you have this image being used across a couple of slides and then you realize, oh, actually, we want to change that image. So what you can do here, there's this thing called Roundtripping. You may have heard of it before, where you actually do some work on the image outside of Captivate, and then the changes that you make will actually show through. So there's two ways that you can do this. So first of all, what we do is we want to find that image in the library. So there it is there, got cropped, like so. And then just to double check that these are the same library items. And what we can also do is we can right mouse click on the image and we've got this option called usage. So we can actually see where that particular image is being used, so we can sort of keep a track of it. So once we've found it in the library, I'll show you both ways. There's two ways. I've still got fireworks on my computer. So what you can do, if you don't have anything set up here, you can click on Edit With, and that will open up your program file. So you can go and find the program that you want to use to edit this. And I'm going to find Adobe 64-bit, so Adobe, here's Photoshop 2018. So I can choose Photoshop from there, for example. That will open up Photoshop. And in actual fact, you can also choose Paint to be your editor. So now it's opening up Photoshop. And just to quickly show you how making changes, so you're choosing Edit With, you're going to choose your program. Once you align the Edit With a program, that actually stays in there as the program or the preferred program. So it opens up. Here's my goat, just to show you that. So if I do this on the image, so I'll make some changes. I then save that file straight away. I think that's saved. So save. And then, even without closing it, this didn't happen to me before. Let's see. So it always works when you test it to make sure that it's going to work. It's been saved in the background. Okay, so it's going to be saved. I think I was just jumping the gun a little bit. So that those changes are being saved, supposedly, by Photoshop. Okay. So theoretically, yes, it will actually update that image back inside of Captivate. This is a really large image, so it's obviously making its changes in the background. Okay, where are we up to? And that didn't work. Of course it didn't. Let's try another option. So theoretically, it is going to work. Trust me. If you're wanting to use Paint, you can. So if we go into Windows and then System 32, you can find MS, so MS paint is in this list. Um, there it is, in this paint. So you can actually associate any image editor with that editing process. I'll just try this again. I'm going to draw something here. Fill it. Where's my bucket? Fill it. Let's rub that out. Okay. And now when I save it, once again, theoretically, it should update. So I close that, and it's not working. Yay! Of course, it never works when you want it to work. So if that doesn't work for you, there is another way. Okay, because this can be a little bit temperamental. So I do apologise for that. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to export this file. I'm going to export it out to my folder and just put it to here. So goat cropped, for example. And then what I'm going to do is I can even do this in PowerPoint. If I just insert the image picture, goat cropped. Quite a large image now, it's 24 megabytes, so maybe it is being a little bit temperamental with those large image sizes. So here I'm just actually uploading the image now, so goat, I'm going to select both those shapes in PowerPoint. I can save as picture from PowerPoint. And keep that as a PNG. So goat with text. Excellent. Okay, now just to double check that that is the right. So it's actually made those changes. Test goat with text. There it is there. So that's an image. Now if I go back to Captivate, right mouse click on the image, and you've got this this area called properties of the image. So I click on properties, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace. It's like pulling a tablecloth out from a table and leaving everything intact. So what I can do here is I can import. I can go to my folder. I can find it. Compress images, test, goat with text. Click on open. And click on OK, and you'll see immediately it's swapped that image out, and it's retained the file name in the library, and it's also updated every instance of that image. So the moral of that story is to keep the images in order. You want your naming convention happening here to keep that up to date so you don't get confused, but also that option is a really good one where you can go into properties and you can just swap it out by just clicking on the import button from here, and that just, you can go and select any image. So I can actually go in and I can choose a completely different image. I'm going to choose this one. And there you go, it's swapped it out, and you'll notice that all instances of that image where it was referenced is now has now been updated. Really appreciate you taking the time out to join us and to go through that. Sorry that last little round tripping didn't work. I'll put it down to the moon, or I'll put it down to something else. The little gremlins inside computers, just when you want them to work.